In the dusty frontier town of Socorro, a 17-year-old girl was about to face the unthinkable. What started as mending her father's shirt in their cramped room above the general store took a shocking turn when they came face to face with Frank Morrison's ultimatum. Elara Santos wasn't your typical frontier daughter. For years, she had spent her life caring for her gambling-addicted father, known for her resilience and hidden strength that belied her 17 years. When she encountered Black Jack Morrison's debt collector demanding payment, she had no idea she was walking into a transaction that would determine her fate. Elara's desperate attempt to save her father would lead to a mysterious rancher's intervention that would change everything. What began as a father's gambling debt would become an unexpected journey of redemption. The town of Socorro would never be the same after Thomas Whitehawk stepped into that saloon and transformed what seemed like Elara's doom into her salvation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows through the threadbare curtains of their cramped room above Hendrick's general store. But Elara Santos had been awake long before dawn. She sat at the small table, carefully mending one of her father's shirts. By candlelight, her needle moving with practiced precision through the worn fabric, the familiar sounds of Socorro awakening drifted up from the street below, the creak of wagon wheels, the distant lowing of cattle being driven to market, the occasional shout of a merchant calling out his wares. Miguel Santos lay sprawled across the narrow bed, still wearing yesterday's clothes that reeked of whiskey and desperation. His breathing was shallow and labored, punctuated by occasional mutters that spoke of dreams filled with cards and dice, and the phantom clink of coins that had long since vanished into other men's pockets. Elara had learned not to wake him during these fitful sleeps. The man who emerged from such dreams was often worse than the one who had stumbled home in the early hours of morning. She set down her mending and moved quietly to the wash basin, splashing tepid water on her face. The mirror above it showed a young woman who looked older than her 17 years. Dark eyes that held too much knowledge of disappointment. Black hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the sharp angles hunger had carved into her cheeks. Her mother's features, people said, though Elara had only faded memories and a single daguerreotype to confirm the resemblance. The heavy footsteps on the stairs outside their door made her freeze. 3 deliberate thuds, then a pause, 3 more. It was a pattern she'd learned to recognize, the calling card of men who collected debts with more than just words. Her father stirred on the bed, his eyes fluttering open with the confusion of someone pulled from the edge of oblivion. "Papa," she whispered urgently, moving to his side. "Someone's coming." Miguel's eyes sharpened with a clarity that only fear could bring. He struggled to sit up, running a trembling hand through his graying hair. "What time is it?" "Just past 7. Elara helped him swing his legs over the side of the bed, noting how his hands shook as he reached for the water pitcher. "Do you know who—" The knock came then, 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo through their bones. Not the polite tap of a neighbor or merchant, but the authoritative demand of someone who expected immediate compliance. "Miguel Santos," a voice called through the thin wood. It was gravelly, worn smooth by years of tobacco and harder spirits. "Open the door. We need to talk." Miguel's face went pale, the color draining so quickly that Elara thought he might faint. His lips moved soundlessly for a moment before he found his voice. "Frank," he whispered, as if saying the name aloud might summon something worse than what already waited outside their door. "Who is Frank?" Elara asked, though something cold was already settling in her stomach. She'd seen that look on her father's face before, The same expression he'd worn when the banker had come to collect on their store, when the landlord had evicted them from their house, when each new catastrophe had stripped away another piece of their life. The knock came again, more insistent now. "Don't make me ask twice, Santos. Black Jack doesn't like to be kept waiting." Miguel struggled to his feet, his legs unsteady beneath him. Elara watched him approach the door with the gait of a man. Walking toward his own execution, his hand trembled as he reached for the latch. Just give me a moment," he called out, his voice cracking. He turned to Elara, his eyes filled with something that might have been love or might have been goodbye. "Mija, whatever happens, whatever you hear, remember that I never wanted this." Before she could ask what he meant, he lifted the latch and pulled the door open. Frank Morrison filled the doorway like a storm cloud, his massive frame blocking out the morning light from the hall. He was dressed in black from his boots to his hat, with a silver chain across his vest that caught what little light remained. His face was weathered leather, marked by a scar that ran from his left temple to the corner of his mouth, a souvenir from his days riding with less legitimate enterprises before his father had carved out his piece of Socorro's underworld. "Morning, Santos." Frank's voice carried the false courtesy of a man who knew he held all the cards. His eyes swept the room, taking in the meager furnishings, the patched clothing, the obvious signs of desperate poverty. When his gaze settled on Elara, something flickered across his features, an assessment, cold and calculating. "Frank," Miguel's voice was barely above a whisper, "I told your father I need more time. Just another week, maybe 2. Time's up." Frank stepped into the room without invitation, his presence making the small space feel even more cramped. Black Jack's been patient, more patient than most men would be with a debt this size. "What debt?" Elara stepped forward, placing herself between Frank and her father. "What are you talking about?" Frank's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Your daddy hasn't told you? He's been playing at my father's table for months now. Started small, like they all do, few dollars here and there, just friendly games among neighbors." His eyes never left Miguel's face as he spoke. "But gambling's like drinking, isn't it, Santos? Takes more and more to get the same feeling." Miguel couldn't meet his daughter's eyes. "Elara, $500, Frank continued, his voice cutting through Miguel's stammered attempt at explanation. "That's what you owe, plus interest. Money you borrowed against future winnings that never came." The number hit Elara like a physical blow. $500 was more money than most people in Socorro saw in 2 years. It was the price of a good horse, or a decent piece of land, or a future that didn't involve scraping by in a room above someone else's store. "That's impossible," she said, though even as the words left her mouth, she could see the truth written in the shame on her father's face. "We don't have that kind of money. We've never had that kind of money." "No," Frank agreed, his tone almost conversational. "You don't, which is why Black Jack sent me to discuss alternative arrangements." The way he said it made Elara's skin crawl. She'd heard stories about Black Jack Morrison's alternative arrangements, about men who'd worked off their debts in his mines, about women who'd found employment in the rooms above his saloon, about debts that somehow never seemed to get smaller no matter how much was paid. "What kind of arrangements?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Frank's gaze moved over her with the same calculating assessment he might give a horse at auction. "You're a pretty girl, Miss Santos. Pretty enough to earn good money in the right establishment. My father's always looking for quality help at the Red Diamond." The implication hit her like ice water. The Red Diamond was Socorro's largest saloon, a place where respectable women didn't go and respectable men pretended they'd never been. She'd seen the women who worked there, painted and perfumed, with hollow eyes that spoke of dreams sold for the price of survival. "No." The word came out sharper than she'd intended. "Absolutely not." Frank's smile widened. I'm afraid it's not really your choice to make. Your father signed a promissory note. When he can't pay in money, the debt transfers to assets, and you, Miss Santos, are his most valuable asset." Miguel finally found his voice, though it came out as little more than a croak. "She's my daughter, Frank. You can't—" "I can, and I will." Frank reached into his vest and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The document looked official, covered in dense legal text that meant nothing to Elara but everything to the man who held it. "This here's a binding contract, witnessed and notarized. Says you'll pay your debts by any means necessary, including collateral." Elara stared at the paper, her mind racing. "When did you sign this?" Miguel's shoulders sagged as if the weight of his confession might crush him. 2 weeks ago. I was sure I could win it back. I had a system, a way to beat the odds. I just needed one more chance." "There's always one more chance," Frank interrupted. "That's what keeps men like your father coming back to the table. But the house always wins in the end. Always." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Miguel's labored breathing and the distant noise of Socorro going about its business, oblivious to the drama playing out in the room above Hendrik's store. Elara felt something breaking inside her chest, not her heart, which had been breaking by degrees for years, but something deeper. The last of her faith in the man who had raised her, who had once read her stories and taught her to write her letters, who had promised her mother on her deathbed that he would take care of their daughter. "How long do we have?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. Frank consulted a pocket watch with the same theatrical precision he'd shown throughout the conversation. "Black Jack's expecting an answer by sunset. That gives you about 10 hours to either come up with $500 or accept his generous offer of employment. And if we refuse—" Something dangerous flickered in Frank's eyes. "That wouldn't be wise, Miss Santos. My father doesn't like to be disappointed, and he has ways of expressing his displeasure that you really wouldn't enjoy." After Frank left, the silence in the room was oppressive. Miguel sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, while Elara stood at the window watching the enforcer's retreating figure disappear into the crowd on the street below. Her mind was working furiously, calculating possibilities, weighing options that all seemed to lead to the same terrible conclusion. "Mija!" Miguel's voice was broken, full of tears he was too ashamed to shed. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I thought I could fix this. I thought I could win enough to pay them back and still have something left for us, for your future." She turned from the window, studying the man who had once been her hero. His face was gaunt from too many nights spent drinking. Instead of eating, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. When had he become this stranger? When had the strong, laughing man who had lifted her onto his shoulders and promised her the world transformed into this broken thing that couldn't even meet her gaze? "Tell me everything," she said quietly. "How much you really owe, how long this has been going on, what else you've promised them." Miguel's confession spilled out like water from a broken dam. The gambling had started innocently enough, just a few hands of poker with friends after his wife's funeral. Something to take his mind off the grief, to fill the empty hours when the silence in their house had become unbearable. But grief and whiskey were poor advisors, and soon he was spending more time at the gaming tables than at his store. "I kept thinking I could win enough to pay off the store's debts," he explained, his words tumbling over each other in his haste to get them out. "Just one good night, one lucky streak, and we'd be free. We could leave Socorro, start over somewhere new, maybe California like you always talked about." Elara listened without interruption as he described the steady progression of his downfall. First his savings, then the money from selling their house, then the proceeds from liquidating his store's inventory. When that wasn't enough, he'd started borrowing from Black Jack Morrison, using their few remaining possessions as collateral. "What possessions?" she asked, though she was beginning to understand why their room felt so empty, why so many familiar things had disappeared over the past few months. Miguel couldn't meet her eyes. "Your mother's jewelry, her wedding ring, the earrings my grandmother gave her, the silver locket with your baby picture inside." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I sold them last week to make a payment to Black Jack. I told him I'd have the rest by today." The words hit her like physical blows. Her mother's jewelry had been the only connection she'd had to the woman who died, bringing her into the world. She'd always imagined wearing her mother's wedding ring on her own wedding day, passing down the family heirlooms to her own daughter someday. Now they were gone, converted into gambling stakes and lost on the turn of a card. "How could you?" The question came out in a whisper, but it carried the weight of years of disappointment and betrayal. "Those things were all I had left of her, all I had left of who we used to be." "I know." Miguel's tears finally came, rolling down his cheeks in silent streams. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of it. If I could take it back, if I could undo every stupid choice I've made since your mother died. But you can't." Elara's voice was steady, matter of fact. "You can't take it back, and you can't fix it, and now we're here." She moved around the room with purposeful efficiency, taking inventory of their remaining possessions. A few changes of clothes, some basic cooking implements, her small collection of books that she'd managed to save from her father's creditors. Nothing that would bring anywhere near the money they needed. "Maybe we could ask Mr. Hendricks for an advance on the rent," Miguel suggested weakly. "Or Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house. She's always been kind to you." Elara didn't bother to respond. They both knew that no one in Socorro had $500 to spare, and even if they did, they wouldn't loan it to Miguel Santos. His reputation as a gambler had made him a pariah among the respectable citizens of the town. The only people who associated with him now were other gamblers and the men who profited from their weakness. As the morning stretched toward noon, Elara found herself thinking about the choices that had led them to this moment. Her father's gambling was the obvious culprit, but it went deeper than that. It went back to her mother's death, to the grief that had broken something fundamental in Miguel's spirit. It went back to the loneliness that had driven him to seek comfort in whiskey and cards, to the guilt that had made him believe he deserved whatever punishment fate chose to deliver. But understanding the reasons didn't change their situation. In less than 8 hours, Frank Morrison would return for Black Jack's answer. And unless a miracle occurred between now and then, Elara would have to choose between selling herself to save her father's skin or watching him face the consequences of his choices, consequences that might well prove fatal. She looked at Miguel, still sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands, and felt something cold settle in her chest. For years, she'd been the adult in their relationship, managing their finances, making the hard decisions, trying to keep them afloat despite his increasingly erratic behavior. She told herself it was temporary, that eventually he would recover from his grief and become the father she remembered. But looking at him now, she realized that man was gone, had been gone for years perhaps, and wasn't coming back. The sun was climbing toward its zenith when she finally spoke again. "We need to go to the Red Diamond." Miguel's head snapped up, his eyes wide with panic. "No, Mija, we'll find another way. There has to be another way." "There isn't." Elara's voice was calm, resigned. "We both know there isn't. So we're going to go to Black Jack Morrison, and we're going to face this like adults, and maybe, if we're very lucky, we'll find a way out of this that doesn't destroy what's left of our lives." But even as she said the words, Elara knew that luck had abandoned the Santos family long ago. Whatever happened next, it would be decided by the choices they made in the next few hours, choices that would determine not just their immediate future, but the very people they would become in the aftermath of this crisis. The sun reached its zenith as they prepared to leave their small room, its harsh light offering no mercy and no reprieve. In the distance, the Red Diamond Saloon waited like a spider in its web, ready to claim what it considered rightfully its own. The moon hung like a silver dollar in the desert sky as Tom Whitehawk's wagon rolled away from Socorro's flickering lights. Elara sat rigid beside him on the wooden seat, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles showed white. In the moonlight, the rhythmic creaking of wheels and the soft thud of hooves on packed earth were the only sounds breaking the vast silence of the New Mexico territory. "Where are you taking me?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom kept his eyes on the dusty road ahead. "My ranch, about 15 miles northwest of town. And then what?" He glanced at her sideways, noting the way she held herself like a coiled spring, ready to bolt at the first opportunity. "That depends on you, Miss Santos." "Don't call me that." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "I'm not a miss anymore, am I? I'm property. Your property." Tom pulled the wagon to a halt, the sudden stop causing Elara to grab the seat rail for balance. In the moonlight, his green eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire. "Let's get something straight right now," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an edge of steel. "I may have bought that contract, but I don't consider human beings property. Never have, never will." "Then why?" "Because Black Jack Morrison would have destroyed you." Tom's words cut through the night air like a blade. "I've seen what happens to women who work off debts at the Red Diamond. Most don't survive the first year." Elara studied his profile in the silver light, searching for deception in the hard lines of his face. "So you're my savior? Is that what you expect me to believe?" "I expect you to believe what you see." Tom clicked to the horses, and the wagon resumed its steady progress through the desert. "When we get to the ranch, you'll have your own room, your own key. You can leave any time you want. And go where?" The bitterness in her voice could have poisoned a well. "Back to Socorro? Back to my father who sold me like a prize heifer?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a gentleness that surprised her. "I had a daughter once. Would have been about your age now if she'd lived." Something in his tone made Elara turn to look at him fully. In the moonlight, she could see pain etched deep in the lines around his eyes. What happened to her? Cholera took her and her mother both, spring of 71. His hands tightened on the reins. "Found them when I came back from a cattle drive. Been too late to say goodbye, too late to tell them I loved them, too late for anything that mattered." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. Elara felt something shift inside her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first crack in the wall of suspicion she'd built around her heart. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Point is, Miss Santos, Elara, when I saw you standing there tonight, about to be fed to the wolves, I couldn't just walk away. Maybe it won't make up for failing my own daughter, but at least it's something." They rode in companionable silence for another mile before Elara spoke again. "What do you expect from me? At your ranch, I mean." "Honest work for honest pay. I've got a housekeeper, Maria, but she's getting on in years. Could use help with cooking, cleaning, maybe handling correspondence. Can you read and write?" "Of course I can read and write." Indignation flared in her voice. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. She made sure I had proper education." "Good. Then you can help me with the books, maybe teach some of the ranch hands' children. Pays $30 a month, plus room and board." $30 a month. It was more than most women in Socorro made in 3 months. "And the contract?" Tom reached into his vest and pulled out the folded paper. Without ceremony, he tore it in half, then quarters, letting the pieces scatter on the desert wind. What contract? For the first time since her mother's death, Elara felt tears of something other than sorrow well up in her eyes. She blinked them back, not ready to trust this unexpected kindness. Why should I believe you? Because, Miss Santos, I'm giving you something your father never did. A choice. The Whitehawk Ranch sprawled across a valley between low hills, its adobe buildings silvered by moonlight. Corrals and outbuildings spoke of prosperity earned through hard work rather than luck. As they approached the main house, a woman emerged onto the front porch, lamp in hand. "Tom? That you?" Her voice carried a slight Spanish accent. "It's me, Maria. Brought someone who needs a hot meal and a safe place to sleep." Maria descended, the steps holding her lamp high to study Elara's face. She was perhaps 50, with graying hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. "Dios mío, she's just a baby," Maria murmured. "Come, Nina. Let's get you inside." As Elara climbed down from the wagon, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of hope. It was fragile as a soap bubble, liable to burst at the slightest touch, but it was there. Tom unhitched the horses while Maria led Elara into the warm, lamp-lit kitchen. The smell of bread and coffee filled the air, along with something else Elara had almost forgotten, the scent of a home where love lived. "Sit," Maria commanded gently, bustling to warm food and prepare a plate. "You look like you haven't eaten in days." As Elara sank into a chair at the scrubbed wooden table, she realized that for the first time since Frank Morrison had knocked on their door that morning, she could breathe without feeling like her chest was caught in a vice. Maybe, just maybe, Thomas Whitehawk was exactly what he claimed to be, a man trying to do right by a stranger, asking nothing in return but honest work. Time would tell if her fragile hope would grow into something stronger or shatter like everything else in her life had shattered, but for tonight, it was enough. Dawn broke over the Whitehawk Ranch with the soft pink light that painted the desert mountains in shades of rose and gold. Elara woke in a real bed for the first time in months, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The room Maria had shown her to was simple but clean. Whitewashed walls, a sturdy wooden dresser, and a window that looked out over rolling pastures where cattle grazed in the morning light. She dressed quickly in one of her 2 remaining dresses, both showing the careful mends that spoke of hard times and careful hands. Through the thin walls, she could hear the sounds of a working ranch coming to life, the lowing of cattle, the nickering of horses, and men's voices calling to each other as they began their daily tasks. When she emerged from her room, the smell of bacon and coffee drew her toward the kitchen. Maria was already bustling around the large wood-burning stove, her graying hair pinned back and a cheerful yellow apron tied around her ample waist. "Buenos dias, Nina," Maria called without turning around. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," Elara admitted, taking a seat at the kitchen table. Through the window, she could see Tom in the corral working with a young horse, his movements patient and sure. "He's good with them," Maria said, following her gaze. "Horses, I mean. They trust him." She set a plate of eggs and bacon before Elara, along with fresh biscuits still warm from the oven. "People, too, when they give him the chance." "How long have you worked here?" 15 years, since just after he bought the place. Maria poured coffee into a heavy ceramic mug and sat across from Elara. "I came here running from my own troubles, scared and alone. He gave me work, respect, a place, to belong. Never asked questions about what I was running from." Elara studied the older woman's face, seeing echoes of her own story in the lines around Maria's dark eyes. Did someone hurt you?" "My husband was not a good man." Maria's voice was matter-of-fact, but Elara caught the shadow that crossed her features. "When he died in a knife fight, I had nowhere to go. Tom found me trying to steal food from his supply wagon in town. Instead of having me arrested, he offered me work. The kitchen door opened, and Tom stepped inside, his boots making soft sounds on the wooden floor. He'd removed his hat, and his auburn hair showed traces of grey at the temples that hadn't been visible in the lamplight the night before. "Morning, ladies." He hung his hat on a peg by the door and accepted the cup of coffee Maria handed him. "Sleep well, Elara?" "Yes, thank you." She found herself studying his face in the daylight, noting the way his green eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the scar along his jaw that spoke of old violence. "Good. I thought maybe today you could get familiar with the place. See what needs doing. No pressure, just whenever you're ready." After breakfast, Tom showed her around the ranch. The Whitehawk spread was larger than she'd realized in the moonlight, with several thousand acres of grazing land, a dozen buildings, and enough cattle to make it one of the more prosperous operations in the territory. "Started with nothing but a patch of land and more debts than sense," Tom explained as they walked past the main barn. "Took 10 years of 18-hour days to build it up to what it is now. Why here? Why New Mexico?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Tom was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "After my wife and daughter died, I couldn't stay in Kansas. Too many memories. Came out here looking for a place where the past couldn't follow me." They paused at a corral where several horses grazed in the morning sun. A young mare approached the fence, and Tom reached out to stroke her neck with gentle fingers. "She's beautiful," Elara said. "Cherokee breeding mixed with Spanish stock, best of both worlds, hardy enough for desert work, but with the intelligence and grace of her ancestors." He glanced at her sideways. "Know anything about horses?" "A little. We had a mare when I was younger before." She let the words trail off, not wanting to voice the litany of losses that had marked her family's decline. "Would you like to learn more? One of my hands is getting married next month, moving back east with his bride. Could use someone to help with the horses, especially the young ones." The offer surprised her. She'd expected to be relegated to household duties, cooking and cleaning like any other woman in her position. "You'd trust me with your horses?" "I'd trust you with anything I value, Elara." The simple words carried a weight that made her breath catch. "Question is, do you trust yourself?" Before she could answer, the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. 3 men on horseback were cantering up the main road to the ranch, dust rising behind them in the still morning air. Tom's expression hardened as he recognized the lead rider. Frank Morrison. Elara's blood turned to ice in her veins. "What does he want?" "Nothing good." Tom's hand moved instinctively to rest on the grip of the Colt revolver at his hip. "Stay behind me." Frank Morrison reined in his horse at the corral fence, his 2 companions flanking him like wolves. In the daylight, he looked even more dangerous than he had in the smoky confines of the Red Diamond, a man who'd grown comfortable with violence and the fear it inspired. "Whitehawk." Frank's voice carried the same false courtesy as the night before. "Fine morning for a ride." "Morrison. Little far from town, aren't you?" "Business brings me out this way." Frank's cold eyes found Elara, and his smile was all teeth. "Seems there's been some confusion about last night's transaction, and she's decided." Miguel turned back to Elara, his face streaked with tears. "Is this what you want? To stay here with this stranger, instead of coming home with your own father?" Elara looked at the broken man who'd raised her, remembering. The father he'd been before grief and guilt had poisoned his spirit. Part of her wanted to go to him, to try one more time to save him from his own weakness, but she'd learned the hard lesson that you couldn't save someone who didn't want to be saved. Tom isn't a stranger anymore," she said softly. "He's shown me more respect and kindness in 3 weeks than you've shown me in 3 years. He gave me a choice about my own life, something you never did." Miguel's legs seemed to give out beneath him, and he sank down onto the porch steps. "What am I supposed to do without you? You're all I have left of her, all I have left of anything good in my life. You're supposed to figure out how to live without gambling," Elara said. "You're supposed to get help, stop drinking, find some honest work. You're supposed to become the man my mother thought she was marrying. And if I do, if I change, if I become better, will you come back then?" Elara was quiet for a long moment, studying the face that had once been her whole world. "I don't know, Papa. I honestly don't know, but I do know that I can't save you. You have to save yourself." Miguel rose slowly to his feet, aging 10 years in the span of a few seconds. He looked at her one last time as if trying to memorize her face, then turned and walked toward the horse he'd left tied at the gate. As he rode away into the gathering darkness, Elara felt something inside her chest both break and heal at the same time. She was truly an orphan now, cut free from the last anchor to her old life, but for the first time in years, she was also truly free to choose who she wanted to become. Tom's hand squeezed her shoulder gently. "You did the right thing. Then, why does it feel so wrong?" "Because loving someone doesn't stop when you have to let them go," he said quietly. "It just becomes a different kind of love, the kind that hopes for the best but doesn't sacrifice everything for it." As they watched Miguel's figure disappear into the desert night, Elara realized that Tom was speaking from his own experience with loss and letting go. The understanding that passed between them needed no words. Two people who'd learned the hard way that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was to refuse to enable someone's self-destruction. Behind them, Maria appeared in the doorway, with cups of coffee and the quiet presence of someone who'd seen her own share of difficult goodbyes. The three of them stood together on the porch as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, bound not by blood or legal contracts, but by the choice to build something better from the pieces of their broken pasts. 2 months had passed since Miguel's desperate visit, and autumn was painting the New Mexico landscape in shades of gold and rust. Elara had thrown herself into ranch work with a determination that impressed even Tom's most experienced hands. She'd proven herself capable with the horses, quick with numbers in the ranch ledger, and possessed of a natural gift for teaching that made her popular with the children of the married hands. The rhythm of her new life had become as natural as breathing, rising before dawn to help Maria with breakfast, spending the morning working with the horses, the afternoon managing correspondence and accounts, and the evening teaching letters and numbers to young minds eager to learn. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt useful, valued, and safe. That safety was shattered on a crisp October morning when Tom returned from town with news that made her blood run cold. "Miguel's dead," he said without preamble, his green eyes holding a gentleness that made the words no less devastating. Elara set down the account book she'd been working on, her hands suddenly unsteady. "How?" "They found him in an alley behind the Red Diamond 3 days ago. Doc Peterson says it was his heart, likely brought on by too much drink and not enough food." Tom sat down across from her at the kitchen table. "I'm sorry, Elara. I know things were complicated between you, but he was still your father." She stared at her hands, trying to process the information. Miguel Santos was gone. The man who'd raised her, loved her, and ultimately betrayed her was nothing more than a memory now. The finality of it was somehow both crushing and liberating. Was he alone when it happened? Tom nodded reluctantly. "Near as anyone can tell. Some of the other gamblers saw him earlier that evening. Said he'd been talking about winning enough to get his daughter back." Looks like he was trying to stake himself into one more big game. Of course he was. Even facing death, Miguel had been chasing the next sure thing, the next miracle that would solve all his problems. Some things, Elara realized, never changed. "There's something else," Tom said carefully. "Black Jack Morrison has been asking questions about you. Seems to think Miguel's death makes his debt transferable to his next of kin." The words hit her like ice water. "But that's impossible. You bought the contract and we burned it." "We burned one contract. Doesn't mean Morrison can't forge another one, especially with Miguel dead and unable to contradict whatever story he wants to tell." Elara felt the familiar weight of fear settling on her shoulders. Just when she'd begun to believe she was truly free, the past was reaching out to drag her back into its web. "What do we do?" Tom's smile was grim but determined. "We make sure Morrison understands that his reach doesn't extend to my ranch." That afternoon, Black Jack Morrison himself rode up to the Whitehawk spread, accompanied by Frank and two other men Elara didn't recognize. Unlike his son's previous visit, this felt more like a military operation than a social call. Tom met them at the main gate, his stance relaxed but ready. Behind him, ranch hands had positioned themselves with the casual efficiency of men who'd done this kind of thing before. Elara watched from the porch, Maria's reassuring presence beside her. "Morrison," Tom said by way of greeting, "you're trespassing." Black Jack was older than his son, but carried himself with the same dangerous confidence. His silver hair was perfectly groomed despite the long ride, and his black suit looked expensive enough to buy a small farm. "Whitehawk, I've come to collect what's mine. Nothing here belongs to you. Miguel Santos died owing me $1,200, Black Jack said, pulling out a document with theatrical precision. "According to territorial law, his debts transfer to his surviving family. That would be his daughter." Tom didn't even glance at the paper. "Miguel Santos sold his daughter's debt to me months ago. Transactions recorded with the territorial clerk." "Interesting story. Unfortunately, I have no record of such a sale." Black Jack's smile was predatory. "And since poor Miguel is no longer available to confirm your version of events, are you calling me a liar?" The question hung in the desert air like the moment before lightning strikes. Black Jack's men shifted nervously in their saddles, hands moving closer to their weapons. "I'm saying that without proper documentation, your claim has no legal standing," Black Jack replied smoothly. "The girl comes with me, or I'll be forced to seek other forms of satisfaction for the debt." "Such as?" "This is a nice spread, Whitehawk. Be a shame if something happened to it. Drought, disease, accidents, terrible things can befall a man who makes the wrong enemies." Tom's laugh was soft and deadly. "Are you threatening me, Morrison?" "I'm offering you a chance to resolve this matter without bloodshed. The girl for the debt, clean and simple." From the porch, Elara watched the confrontation with a growing sense of inevitability. She'd been foolish to think she could ever truly escape the consequences of her father's choices. Men like Black Jack Morrison didn't simply walk away from what they considered their property. But then Tom did something that changed everything. "Counter-offer," he said calmly. "I'll buy out Miguel's debt for face value. $1,200 cash today." Black Jack's eyebrows rose slightly. "Generous, but I'm afraid the girl has additional value beyond the monetary debt." "What kind of additional value?" "She's young, healthy, educated, worth considerably more than $1,200 in the right market. I'd say $3,000 would be closer to fair market value." The astronomical sum made Elara's knees weak. $3,000 was more money than most people saw in a lifetime. Even Tom, with his successful ranch, couldn't possibly have that kind of cash available. But Tom's expression didn't change. "3,000 it is." Black Jack's confident smile faltered slightly. "Cash?" "Cash. Give me 2 hours to get to the bank in town. Tom, no, Elara called from the porch, finally finding her voice. Don't bankrupt yourself for me. I won't let you. This isn't your choice, Tom said without turning around, his eyes locked on Black Jack's face. It's mine. Black Jack studied Tom for a long moment, clearly trying to decide whether this was a bluff or genuine offer. 2 hours, but if you're not back by sunset with the full amount, the girl comes with me. No more negotiations, no more delays. As the Morrison party rode away, Elara ran to Tom's side. You can't do this. $3,000 will ruin you financially. Tom's smile was surprisingly calm. Will it? Maria, saddle ranger for me, and send one of the boys to town to fetch Sheriff Martinez. Sheriff Martinez? Elara was confused. Why do we need the sheriff? Because what Black Jack Morrison just did was extortion, and I want a witness when I make my counteroffer. What counteroffer? Tom's green eyes held a glint that was part humor and part something much more dangerous. I'm going to offer him a choice. He can take $500 and call the debt settled, or he can explain to a federal marshal why he's been running illegal gambling operations and forcing women into indentured servitude. But what if he refuses? What if he calls your bluff? It's not a bluff, Elara. I've been documenting Morrison's activities for months, ever since I first heard rumors about the contracts he was forcing desperate men to sign. Between my records and testimony from some of his former victims, I have enough evidence to put him away for a very long time. Elara stared at him in amazement. You've been planning this? I've been preparing for it. There's a difference. Tom headed toward the barn, his movements purposeful and sure. Men like Morrison only understand one language, power. Today, he's going to learn that he's not the only one who speaks it. As Tom rode toward town with Sheriff Martinez, Elara found herself pacing the ranch house like a caged animal. Maria tried to distract her with cooking and conversation, but her thoughts kept returning to the confrontation that was coming. He'll be all right, Maria said finally, looking up from the bread she was kneading. Tom knows what he's doing. How can you be so calm? Because I've seen him handle men like Morrison before. They think they're wolves, but they're really just bullies who've never faced anyone willing to fight back. The sun was touching the western mountains when Tom finally returned, alone. Elara met him at the gate, searching his face for any sign of how the confrontation had gone. Well, she asked. Tom's smile was tired but satisfied. Morrison took the $500. Seems he wasn't interested in discussing his business practices with federal authorities. That's it? We're free? That's it. Tom swung down from his horse, wincing slightly as his boots hit the ground. Morrison's agreed to cancel all claims against you and your father's estate. Sheriff Martinez witnessed the agreement, and it's been filed with the territorial clerk. Elara felt her knees give out with relief, and Tom caught her before she could fall. For a moment they stood there, her hands gripping his arms as she tried to process what had just happened. Why? She whispered. Why would you risk so much? For me? Tom's answer was quiet but certain. Because you're worth it. Because everyone deserves a chance to build their own life without the past constantly dragging them backward. As the desert stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elara realized that for the first time in her life she was truly free. Free from her father's debts, free from Morrison's threats, and free to choose what came next. The future stretched ahead of her like an open prairie, full of possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. Spring arrived early in the New Mexico territory that year, painting the desert in brilliant wildflowers and bringing new life to the Whitehawk Ranch. Elara had been there nearly 8 months now, and the scared, desperate girl who'd been sold like cattle in the Red Diamond had transformed into a confident young woman who could gentle a wild horse, balance account books, and teach children with equal skill. She stood at the corral fence watching Tom work, with a particularly stubborn stallion, admiring the patience and quiet strength he brought to everything he did. Over the months, their relationship had evolved from protector and protected to something deeper, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared values. Yet, there remained an unspoken tension between them, a careful distance that both maintained. Despite the growing attraction, neither could fully hide. "He's beautiful," she said as Tom finally succeeded in getting a halter on the black stallion. "Stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery," Tom replied, but there was affection in his voice. "Reminds me of someone I know." Elara laughed, a sound that had become common around the ranch. "Are you calling me stubborn, Mr. Whitehawk?" "I'm calling you strong-willed, Miss Santos. There's a difference." The easy banter between them was interrupted by the arrival of a buckboard wagon, carrying an elderly man in a black suit and a woman in traveling clothes. Tom frowned as he recognized the visitors. "Judge Henderson," he said, walking over to meet them. "Mrs. Patterson, what brings you out this way?" Judge Henderson was Socorro's territorial judge, a fair man who'd earned respect throughout the territory for his integrity. Mrs. Patterson ran the town's only boarding house and served as an unofficial social arbiter for the community's more respectable families. "Official business, I'm afraid," Judge Henderson said, climbing down from the wagon with the careful movements of a man feeling his years. "May we speak privately?" Tom glanced at Elara, then nodded toward the house. "Of course. Maria's got coffee on." Once they were settled around the kitchen table, Judge Henderson got straight to the point. "There's been some talk in town about the young lady's situation. Questions about the propriety of an unmarried woman living on a bachelor's ranch without proper supervision." Elara felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. "My situation is perfectly proper, Your Honor. I'm an employee here, nothing more." "I'm sure that's true, my dear," Mrs. Patterson said, with the kind of smile that wasn't really a smile at all. "But appearances matter in a small community. People talk, and the talk isn't always kind." "What kind of talk?" Tom's voice had taken on an edge that made both visitors shift uncomfortably. Judge Henderson cleared his throat. "There are those who suggest that the arrangement between you and Miss Santos isn't entirely unprofessional, that perhaps you've taken advantage of her vulnerable situation." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Elara saw Tom's hands clench into fists on the table, and she quickly placed her own hand over his to prevent him from saying something that might make the situation worse. "Judge Henderson," she said carefully, "Mr. Whitehawk has treated me with nothing but respect and kindness. He gave me work when I needed it, protection when I was threatened, and a home when I had nowhere else to go. If people are suggesting otherwise, they're either misinformed or malicious." "Nevertheless," Mrs. Patterson interjected, "the situation is irregular. A young woman of marriageable age living alone with a man to whom she's not related. It simply isn't done in civilized society." "What are you suggesting?" Tom asked, his voice carefully controlled. Judge Henderson exchanged a look with Mrs. Patterson before answering. "The territory has certain standards for moral conduct. If Miss Santos wishes to remain in the community, she needs to be in a more conventional situation, such as marriage would be the obvious solution," Mrs. Patterson said with false brightness. "I happen to know several eligible gentlemen who would be happy to consider Miss Santos as a bride. The banker's son in Las Cruces is looking for a wife, and there's a cattle buyer from Texas who's expressed interest in settling down with a respectable young woman." Elara felt her stomach drop. After everything she'd been through, they were trying to arrange another sale, this time dressed up in the respectable language of marriage and social propriety. "And if I refuse?" she asked. Judge Henderson looked genuinely regretful. "Then I'm afraid you'd need to leave the territory. There are church-sponsored programs for women in your situation, homes for wayward girls, where you could receive proper guidance and training in domestic skills." Wayward girls. Elara's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "Your Honor, with respect, I've done nothing wayward. I work hard, I pay my own way, and I harm no one. But you live outside the bounds of conventional morality, Mrs. Patterson said primly. That makes you a bad influence on other young women who might think they can flout society's rules with impunity." Tom had been silent through this exchange, but now he stood abruptly. "Get out! I beg your pardon?" Judge Henderson looked startled. "You heard me. Get off my land, both of you." "Mr. Whitehawk," the judge said sternly, "I'm trying to help. Resolve this situation before it becomes a legal matter. If you're not willing to cooperate, then what? You'll have me arrested for giving an honest job to a woman who needed one? You'll drag Elara away because she had the audacity to make her own choices instead of letting men decide her fate?" Mrs. Patterson's face flushed with indignation. "Young man, you're being deliberately obtuse. We're offering perfectly reasonable solutions. You're offering to auction her off to the highest bidder, just like her father did." Tom's voice was dangerously quiet. "The only difference is you're calling it marriage instead of debt slavery." Judge Henderson stood as well, his expression grave. "I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that accusation, Mr. Whitehawk, but I want you to understand the seriousness of this situation. The territorial governor has been receiving complaints about moral laxity in remote communities. If this matter isn't resolved satisfactorily, it could result in federal intervention." After the visitors left, the kitchen fell into heavy silence. Elara stared at her hands, trying to process what had just happened. Once again, men were making decisions about her life, determining her value based on their own narrow definitions of respectability. "I'm sorry," Tom said finally. "I shouldn't have lost my temper." "You were defending me," Elara replied. "I'm grateful for that. But it may have made things worse." Tom ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd learned to recognize as a sign of deep frustration. "If they involve federal authorities, they could force you to leave whether we like it or not." Elara was quiet for a long moment, thinking through their limited options. The unfairness of it all was staggering. She'd finally found a place where she could build a meaningful life, only to have it threatened by people who cared more about appearances than actual morality. "Tom," she said carefully, "what if we gave them what they want?" "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, gathering her courage for what she was about to suggest. "What if we got married?" The words seemed to echo in the kitchen silence. Tom stared at her, his green eyes unreadable. "Elara!" "Not for love," she said quickly, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "Not for romance or any of those things. Just as a practical arrangement to satisfy the busybodies and let us continue living our lives in peace." Tom was quiet for so long that she began to wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake in suggesting it. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "Marriage is a serious commitment, even a practical one. You shouldn't enter into it lightly, especially not to solve someone else's moral concerns. And you shouldn't have to spend $500 to keep Black Jack Morrison from enslaving me, but you did it anyway," Elara countered. "Sometimes practical solutions are the best ones. This is different." "How?" Tom looked at her for a long moment, and she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. Longing, perhaps, or regret. "Because once we're married, that's it. There's no going back. No changing your mind if a better opportunity comes along." "What better opportunity?" Elara asked. Marriage to some stranger who sees me as a business transaction, a life in some institution for wayward girls. Tom, this ranch is the first place I've ever felt truly at home. You and Maria are the closest thing to family I've had since my mother died. Why would I want to give that up? And if someday you meet someone you actually want to marry, someone you could love. The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither was quite ready to address. Elara looked at Tom, really looked at him, taking in the strong lines of his face, the kindness in his green eyes, the gentle strength that had protected and supported her through the worst period of her life. "I'm looking at him," she said, quietly. The admission surprised them both. Tom's eyes widened, and Elara felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she realized what she'd just confessed. "Elara, I know you loved your wife," she said quickly. "I know I could never replace her, and I'm not asking you to. But I also know that what we have, this partnership, this friendship, this, whatever it is, it's real. It's worth protecting." Tom stood and walked to the window, staring out at the ranch they'd built together. When he turned back to her, his expression was soft but serious. "If we do this," he said, "it has to be real, not just a convenience or a way to solve our problems. If you're going to be my wife, then you're going to be my wife in every way that matters." Elara felt her breath catch at the intensity in his voice. "And if I'm going to be your husband," she said, matching his seriousness, "then you're going to be my husband in every way that matters." They looked at each other across the kitchen, two people who'd found something precious in the aftermath of loss and betrayal. Whatever they called it, love, partnership, or simply the recognition of two souls that fit together, it was real enough to build a life on. "All right then," Tom said, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Elara Santos, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Tom Whitehawk, I will." As the sun set over the New Mexico desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Elara realized that her long journey from victim to survivor to someone who could choose her own destiny was finally complete. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she would face them as Tom's partner, as an equal, as a woman who had claimed her own place in the world. The future stretched ahead of them like an open prairie, full of possibilities they would explore together. The wedding preparations consumed the ranch for 3 weeks, transforming the practical working homestead into something that sparkled with anticipation and joy. Maria threw herself into the planning with the enthusiasm of a general preparing for a crucial battle, commandeering the kitchen, ordering supplies from as far away as Santa Fe, and drilling the ranch hands on their roles in the ceremony until even the most gruff cowboy could recite his duties without stumbling. "This isn't just any wedding," she declared to anyone within earshot. "This is Tom's wedding and Elara's wedding, and it's going to be perfect if I have to rope every wildflower in New Mexico to make it so." Tom watched the controlled chaos with amused tolerance, occasionally offering suggestions that were either enthusiastically adopted or firmly dismissed, depending on Maria's assessment of their merit. He'd insisted on keeping the ceremony simple and the guest list small. Just the ranch hands and their families, Sheriff Martinez and his wife Doc Peterson, and a handful of friends from town who'd proven themselves genuine allies over the months. Elara found herself caught between excitement and nervousness as the day approached. The practical part of their arrangement remained unchanged. They were solving a problem, protecting their way of life, and satisfying the moral concerns of a community that had too much time for gossip and too little understanding of real hardship. But somewhere in the weeks of planning, she'd begun to realize that her feelings for Tom had evolved far beyond gratitude or even partnership. She loved the way he gentled nervous horses with infinite patience, never raising his voice or forcing compliance, but earning trust through consistency and kindness. She loved how he treated every person on the ranch with respect, regardless of their position or background. She loved the quiet strength he'd shown in facing down Black Jack Morrison, and the protective fury he'd displayed when Judge Henderson had threatened her freedom. Most of all, she loved the way he looked at her, not as a burden to be managed or a problem to be solved, but as an equal partner whose opinions mattered and whose happiness was worth protecting. The night before the wedding, unable to sleep, Elara found herself walking to the corral where Tom often went when he needed to think. She wasn't surprised to find him there, leaning against the fence and staring up at the star-scattered sky. "Nervous?" she asked, joining him at the rail. "Terrified," he admitted with a rueful smile. "Not about marrying you, about whether I'm doing right by you, whether you might wake up one day and realize you settled for safety when you could have had so much more." Elara was quiet for a moment, considering his words. "Tom, do you know what I wanted most when I was growing up? What I dreamed about when my father was out gambling away what little we had?" "What?" "A home. Not just a house or a roof over my head, but a real home where I belonged, where I was valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. A place where I could wake up each morning knowing that my world wouldn't be torn apart by someone else's poor choices." She turned to face him fully. "You've given me that. More than that. You've shown me that I'm strong enough to help build it, to be a full partner in creating something meaningful." Tom's eyes searched her face in the moonlight. "And that's enough? Really enough?" "Tom Whitehawk," she said with gentle firmness, "you are the most honorable man I've ever known. You're kind without being weak, strong without being cruel, and decent in a way that seems to be increasingly rare in this world. If you think I'm settling by choosing to spend my life with you, then you vastly underestimate your own worth." He was quiet for a long moment, then reached out to cup her face gently in his calloused palm. "Elara Santos, I think I'm falling in love with you." Her breath caught at the admission. "I think I'm falling in love with you too." When he kissed her, it was different from the chaste kiss they'd shared when he'd first proposed, deeper, more urgent, full of promise and possibility. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "We should probably get some sleep," Tom said, though he made no move to leave. "Probably," Elara agreed, though she remained exactly where she was. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the desert night and listening to the peaceful sounds of the ranch settling into sleep around them. Tomorrow would change everything, but somehow that no longer felt frightening. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something they'd both been waiting for, without quite realizing it. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers and the promise of good weather. Elara woke before sunrise, her stomach fluttering with butterflies, and found Maria already in the kitchen preparing what seemed like enough food to feed half the territory. "Buenos dias, bride," Maria said cheerfully, pressing a cup of coffee into Elara's hands. "How did you sleep?" "Barely," Elara admitted. "I kept thinking about everything that could go wrong, such as, what if Judge Henderson changes his mind about performing the ceremony? What if Tom realizes he's making a mistake? What if—" "Mija," Maria interrupted gently but firmly. "Stop. You're borrowing trouble from tomorrow instead of enjoying the gift of today. Tom loves you, you love him, and in a few hours you'll be married. Everything else is just noise." As the morning progressed, the ranch transformed into a place of celebration. The hands had strung lanterns between the trees, set up tables and chairs in the front yard, and even convinced a few of the horses to wear ribbons in their manes. Sheriff Martinez arrived early with his wife Carmen, who immediately appointed herself Maria's assistant in the final food preparations. Doc Peterson came next, followed by the Hendersons. Not Judge Henderson, but the family who ran the general store in town, and who'd always been kind to Elara during her family's worst days. More friends arrived throughout the morning, each bringing dishes to share and genuine wishes for happiness. By noon, Elara was dressed in the white gown that Maria had somehow managed to create from fabric, skill, and what seemed like pure determination. The dress was simple but elegant, with a fitted bodice that emphasized her figure and a flowing skirt that moved like water when she walked. The veil had belonged to Tom's first wife, offered by Tom himself, with the quiet explanation that Sarah would have wanted it worn by someone who would love and honor the family name. "You look beautiful, Nina," Maria said, adjusting the veil one final time. "Tom is a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Elara replied, and meant it. Judge Henderson arrived at exactly 1 o'clock, still somewhat stiff in his interactions, but clearly making an effort to be gracious. He'd agreed to perform the ceremony after Tom's pointed reminder that his job was to uphold justice and protect citizens' rights, not enforce arbitrary social conventions. The ceremony itself took place on the front porch of the ranch house, with the guests gathered in a semicircle on the lawn. Tom stood waiting in his best black suit, his auburn hair neatly combed and his green eyes bright with emotion. When he saw Elara walking toward him, his face lit up with a smile that made her heart skip. "Dearly beloved," Judge Henderson began, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Thomas Whitehawk and Elara Santos in holy matrimony. Marriage is a sacred bond, entered into not lightly but with careful consideration and genuine affection." The words washed over Elara as she stood beside Tom, acutely aware of his presence, his steady breathing, the way his hand trembled slightly when he took hers. This was really happening. After everything she'd endured, her father's betrayal, Morrison's threats, the community's judgment, she was finally choosing her own path with a man who respected her enough to let her choose. "Thomas," Judge Henderson continued, "do you take Elara to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, in good times and bad, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Tom said, his voice clear and certain, his eyes never leaving Elara's face. "And Elara, do you take Thomas to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, in good times and bad, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," she replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Tom slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his grandmother's ring, he'd told her, saved for this moment when he'd found someone worthy of wearing it. The metal was warm from his pocket, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Thomas, you may kiss your bride." When Tom kissed her, it was gentle at first, respectful of their audience, but deepened as Elara responded with enthusiasm that surprised them both. The gathered friends and ranch hands cheered, whistled, and threw rice, while Maria dabbed at her eyes with her apron. The celebration that followed was everything Elara had dreamed of as a lonely girl, filled with laughter, music, and the genuine affection of people who'd become her chosen family. The ranch hands had surprised everyone by organizing an impromptu band with harmonicas, a battered guitar, and even a fiddle that old Pete had been hiding in his bunk for years. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Elara found herself dancing with her new husband under the New Mexico sky, surrounded by friends who'd chosen to celebrate their happiness rather than judge their unconventional beginning. Tom was a surprisingly good dancer, guiding her through simple waltzes and livelier country dances with the same quiet confidence he brought to everything else. "No regrets?" he asked during a slow song, holding her close enough that she could feel his heartbeat. "None," she said firmly. "You?" "Only that we waited so long to admit what we both knew was happening." "And what was that?" Tom's smile was soft and genuine. that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, the last of the guests began to drift away, offering final congratulations and promises to visit soon. Maria retired to her own small house behind the main building, leaving Tom and Elara alone for the first time as husband and wife. They stood together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, both acutely aware that their relationship had changed fundamentally in the space of a few hours. They were no longer just partners in a practical arrangement. They were married, with all the intimacy and commitment that the word implied. "So," Tom said finally, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty that was rare for him, "what happens now?" Elara turned to face him, taking in the strong lines of his face, the kindness in his green eyes, the protective strength that had sheltered her through the worst period of her life. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from desperate victim to survivor, to a woman confident enough to choose her own destiny. "Now," she said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands, "we go inside and begin our life together. Really together." Tom's eyes darkened with understanding and desire. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." When he swept her up in his arms and carried her across the threshold, Elara felt a joy so complete it was almost overwhelming. She'd found her home, her partner, her place in the world, whatever challenges lay ahead, and she knew there would be many. She would face them not as a victim of circumstance, but as an equal partner in a marriage built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and the conscious choice to build something beautiful together. Later, as they lay entwined in the moonlight streaming through their bedroom window, Tom traced gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. "I love you, Mrs. Whitehawk," he whispered. "I love you too, Mr. Whitehawk," she replied, savoring the sound of her new name. As sleep finally claimed them both, Elara's last conscious thought was of profound gratitude, not just for Tom's love, but for her own strength in surviving long enough to find it. She'd been sold, threatened, and judged, but she'd never been broken. And now, in the arms of a man who valued her for exactly who she was, she understood that her greatest victory wasn't in finding safety, but in learning to trust herself enough to recognize love when it found her. The future stretched ahead of them like an open prairie, full of promise and possibility, all of it to be explored together. The first months of marriage brought changes that neither Tom nor Elara had fully anticipated. What had begun as a practical arrangement had blossomed into something far deeper and more complex, a partnership that challenged both of them to grow in ways they hadn't expected. Elara threw herself into her new role as ranch co-owner with characteristic determination, but now she approached each task with the confidence of someone who truly belonged. She expanded the horse training program, adding 3 new mares to their breeding stock and developing a reputation throughout the territory for producing animals with exceptional temperament and intelligence. Her natural gift for teaching found new expression as she began working with not just the ranch children, but also some of the younger hands who'd never learned to read and write. Tom watched his wife's transformation with a mixture of pride and amazement. The scared, desperate girl he'd rescued from the Red Diamond had become a force of nature, still gentle and compassionate, but with an inner steel that commanded respect from everyone on the ranch. She'd found her voice, and when she spoke, people listened. Their physical relationship had developed more slowly than either had expected, built on trust and genuine affection rather than passion alone. But as the weeks passed, the careful boundaries they'd maintained began to dissolve, replaced by an intimacy that surprised them both with its depth and tenderness. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Tom admitted one evening as they sat together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "What way?" Elara asked, though she suspected she knew. "Complete," he said simply, "like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, with exactly the person I'm supposed to be with." Elara turned to study his profile, noting the peace that had settled over his features in recent weeks. The grief and guilt that had shadowed his eyes since Sarah's death had finally begun to fade, replaced by something that looked like hope. "Do you feel guilty about that?" she asked gently, "about being happy again?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the thoughtfulness that marked all his important decisions. "I did, at first. It felt like betraying Sarah's memory, like I was somehow diminishing what we'd had by finding love again. And now I think Sarah would want me to be happy. She'd want both of us to be happy. She was never the kind of woman who would want her death to mean the end of joy for everyone who loved her." As summer progressed, their contentment was tested by challenges that reminded them both that happiness was something that had to be actively protected and maintained. A severe drought threatened their water supply, forcing them to make difficult decisions about which cattle to sell and which to keep. Several of their best hands moved on to other opportunities, leaving them short-handed during the crucial fall roundup. But perhaps the most significant challenge came from an unexpected source: Elara's own success. Word of her skill with horses had spread beyond the immediate territory, and by late summer she was receiving offers from ranchers as far away as Colorado and California. The most tempting came from a wealthy cattle baron in Denver who offered her 3 times what she could earn in New Mexico, along with a position managing his extensive breeding program. "It's an incredible opportunity," Tom said when she showed him the letter, though she could see the worry in his eyes. "The kind of chance that doesn't come along often." "It is," Elara agreed, studying the elegant handwriting and expensive paper. "But it would mean leaving everything we've built here." "Not everything. We could sell the ranch, use the money to buy land in Colorado, start fresh somewhere new." Elara looked at her husband, noting the careful way he was trying to hide his reluctance behind practical considerations. "Is that what you want? To start over?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the mountains that had become as familiar as old friends. "What I want," he said finally, "is for you to have every opportunity to use your gifts. If that means Colorado, then we'll go to Colorado. And if it means staying here, then we'll stay here and continue building something that's ours." That night, Elara lay awake long after Tom had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the choice before her. The offer from Denver represented everything she'd once dreamed of: recognition, financial security, the chance to work with the finest horses in the country. It was the kind of opportunity that ambitious people spent their entire lives hoping for. But as she listened to Tom's steady breathing beside her and felt the familiar comfort of their shared bed, she realized that ambition wasn't the driving force in her life anymore. What mattered most was the life they'd built together, the ranch that bore their joint efforts, the community that had become their extended family, the daily rhythm of shared work and shared dreams. The next morning, she wrote her response to the Denver offer, declining with gratitude and explaining that her commitments in New Mexico made it impossible for her to relocate. When she showed the letter to Tom, his relief was so obvious that she wondered why she'd ever considered the offer seriously. "No regrets?" he asked, echoing the question that had become something of a ritual between them. "None," she said, sealing the letter with wax. "This is where I belong." That decision proved to be prophetic in ways neither of them could have anticipated. 2 weeks later, Elara discovered she was pregnant. The news brought a joy so intense it was almost frightening. They talked about children in abstract terms, but the reality of new life growing inside her transformed their marriage once again, adding a new dimension of tenderness and protectiveness to their relationship. "A baby," Tom said wonderingly, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Elara asked, though his expression already answered the question. "I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful all at the same time," he admitted. "What about you?" Elara considered the question seriously. Pregnancy in the frontier territories was always risky, and she'd seen too many women lost to childbirth to take the danger lightly. But beneath the practical concerns lay a deep well of excitement and anticipation. "I'm ready," she said finally, "ready to be a mother, ready to raise a child who'll know from the first day of life that they're wanted and loved and valued for exactly who they are." As autumn arrived and her pregnancy became visible, Elara found herself the recipient of advice from every woman within 50 miles. Maria appointed herself chief advisor and protector, adjusting Elara's diet and workload with the determination of a general managing a crucial campaign. "No lifting anything heavier than a water bucket," Maria declared. "No working with the stallions. No riding anything more spirited than that old gelding Pete uses for checking fence lines." "Maria," Elara protested, "I'm pregnant, not made of glass." "You're carrying precious cargo, Nina. We're not taking any chances." Tom supported Maria's protective instincts, though he was more diplomatic in his approach. He simply rearranged the ranch work so that Elara's tasks were less physically demanding, bringing her more fully into the business and planning aspects of the operation. "You have a gift for seeing the bigger picture," he explained when she questioned the change. "Maybe it's time we put that to better use." As winter settled over the ranch, bringing crisp mornings and the kind of clear, cold air that made every breath feel like a blessing, Elara found herself thinking often about the baby growing inside her. She wondered what kind of world they were bringing their child into, what challenges and opportunities would shape the next generation. One evening, as she sat by the fire working on a baby blanket, while Tom read aloud from a book of poetry, she realized that their story had become something neither of them had originally planned. What had begun as a desperate arrangement to solve immediate problems had evolved into something rich and complex and deeply satisfying. "Tom," she said, interrupting his reading, "do you ever think about how different our lives would be if we'd never met?" He looked up from the book, his green eyes reflecting the firelight. "Sometimes, but not often." "Why not?" "Because," he said, closing the book and moving to sit beside her on the couch, "some things are too precious to risk diminishing with speculation. What we have is real, it's ours, and it's built on choices we made together. That's enough for me." Elara leaned against his shoulder, feeling the baby stir gently in response to her father's voice. "It's enough for me too." As the winter nights grew longer and the baby's arrival drew nearer, they spent their evenings making plans and sharing dreams for their growing family. They talked about the values they wanted to instill, the kind of education they hoped to provide, the balance between protecting their child and allowing them the freedom to make their own choices. "I want them to know they're loved," Elara said one night, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "But I also want them to know they're strong enough to face whatever life brings their way." "They'll know," Tom assured her, his own hand covering hers. "They'll have us to show them." On a bitter February morning, with snow falling steadily outside and Maria bustling around the house in preparation, Elara went into labor. Doc Peterson had been staying at the ranch for the past week, waiting for this moment, and his calm presence helped steady everyone's nerves as the long day progressed. Tom paced the kitchen like a caged animal, jumping at every sound from the bedroom where Elara labored with Maria and Doc Peterson attending her. The waiting was almost unbearable, worse than facing down armed men or weathering the worst storms. The territory could produce. When the baby's first cry finally echoed through the house, Tom's knees nearly gave out with relief. Doc Peterson emerged from the bedroom a few minutes later, his weathered face creased in a smile. "Congratulations," he said, clasping Tom on the shoulder. "You have a daughter, a healthy, strong daughter who's already making her opinions known to the world." Tom entered the bedroom to find Elara propped up against pillows, exhausted, but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle in her arms. The baby was perfect, red-faced and wrinkled, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with serious consideration. "Meet Sarah Elara Whitehawk," Elara said softly, holding out the baby for Tom to see. Tom's eyes filled with tears as he looked down at his daughter, named for his first wife and his second, a bridge between past and future that somehow made both more meaningful. When he gently took the baby in his arms, she stopped crying and seemed to study his face with grave attention. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Welcome to the world." As the three of them sat together in the quiet bedroom, snow falling gently outside and the fire crackling in the hearth, Elara felt a completeness she'd never imagined possible. Her journey from victim to survivor to beloved wife and mother was complete, but more than that, it had prepared her for this moment, to be exactly the kind of parent she'd always wished she'd had. The future stretched ahead of them, no longer uncertain but filled with purpose and possibility. They had work to do, a ranch to run, a daughter to raise, and a love that had proven strong enough to weather any storm. "No regrets?" Tom asked, the familiar question taking on new meaning as they looked down at their sleeping daughter. "None," Elara replied, and knew she would never have cause to regret the choices that had brought her to this perfect moment. 5 years later, the Whitehawk Ranch had become more than just a successful cattle operation. It was a beacon of prosperity and fairness in the territory. Elara watched through the kitchen window as 5-year-old Sarah attempted to saddle her pony, her dark hair escaping from braids and her small face set with fierce determination. "Mama, I can do it myself," Sarah called when Maria approached to help. "She's going to be a handful," Tom said, emerging from his office with ledger books. "She already is," Elara replied fondly. "Yesterday, I found her teaching the new foal to shake hands." Tom wrapped his arms around his wife from behind. "Speaking of news, the territorial governor has asked me to serve on a commission studying statehood requirements. It would mean several weeks in Santa Fe." Elara turned in his arms. "That's a tremendous honor. It would mean leaving you to manage everything alone during spring roundup. Tom, I've been running this place alongside you for 5 years. I think I can handle a few weeks on my own." Their daughter burst through the kitchen door, flushed with triumph. "Mama, Papa, did you see? I saddled Buttercup all by myself." Tom caught her in a practiced motion, swinging her onto his shoulders. "Very impressive, little bird. Can we check the new foals now?" "After lunch," Elara said, smoothing Sarah's wild hair. "And after you wash your hands." "I like how the stable smells," Sarah declared. "It smells like horses and hay and home." That evening, after Sarah was tucked into bed, they sat on their porch discussing the governor's offer. "I want you to take the appointment," Elara said firmly. "This territory needs voices like yours, people who understand what it's like to build something from nothing." The governor mentioned that statehood could lead to opportunities in the new state government, real influence over how New Mexico develops. For Sarah's generation, for all the children growing up here, Elara felt pride surge through her. Tom's vision extended far beyond their ranch, encompassing a future of justice and opportunity for everyone. "Then you have to do it. We didn't build this place just for ourselves." Tom took her hand. "What did I ever do to deserve you, Elara Whitehawk?" "You saw me," she said simply. When everyone else saw a problem, you saw a person worth protecting. You gave me the chance to become who I was meant to be. And who is that? Elara considered her journey from desperate girl to confident woman. I'm someone who owns her own life, a wife and mother and partner who makes her own choices and faces consequences with courage. I'm someone who builds things instead of just surviving them. In Tom's absence, Elara managed the ranch with military efficiency, proving the operation could thrive under her leadership. When he returned from Santa Fe, eyes bright with excitement about statehood prospects, he found a ranch running smoother than ever. I'm proud of you, Elara said that evening. And I'm proud of you. Sarah's grown so much, more confident, more capable. She had a good example to follow. As they sat under star-filled sky, surrounded by peaceful ranch sounds, Elara felt deep satisfaction. Their love story had begun with desperation, but grown into something enduring, a partnership built on mutual respect and the courage to keep choosing each other day after day. Whatever the future brought, they would face it together as equals, having learned that the greatest victories came not from battlefields, but from the quiet daily work of building a life worth living. 10 years had passed since Tom's first commission to Santa Fe, and the territory of New Mexico was finally on the verge of achieving statehood. The Whitehawk Ranch had become legendary throughout the Southwest, not just for its exceptional horses and cattle, but as a model of progressive ranching that treated all workers fairly regardless of their heritage or background. 15-year-old Sarah Whitehawk stood at the corral fence, watching her mother work with a spirited Andalusian stallion that had arrived from Spain just weeks before. The girl had grown tall and graceful, with her father's green eyes and her mother's quiet determination, but there was something uniquely her own in the way she moved through the world, confident without arrogance, curious without recklessness. "He's beautiful, Mama," Sarah called out, as Elara successfully got the stallion to accept the halter. "But why does he keep trying to bite you?" "Because he's scared," Elara replied, her voice calm and steady. "He's been shipped across an ocean, separated from everything familiar, surrounded by strangers speaking a different language. Wouldn't you be defensive too?" "I suppose so." Sarah climbed onto the fence rail with the easy grace of someone who'd grown up around horses. "But how do you get him to trust you?" "The same way you get anyone to trust you: patience, consistency, and proving through your actions that you mean no harm." It was a lesson Elara had learned the hard way during her own journey from fear to confidence, and one she'd tried to pass on to her daughter in countless small moments over the years. Sarah had never known the kind of desperate vulnerability that had shaped her mother's early life, but Elara was determined that she understand the value of empathy and strength in equal measure. Tom emerged from the house carrying a telegram, his expression serious but not alarmed. At 43, he carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who'd successfully balanced ranching, politics, and family for over a decade. His hair showed more grey now, and there were deeper lines around his eyes, but his fundamental character remained unchanged, steady, principled, and devoted to the people and causes he'd chosen to protect. "News from Santa Fe," he announced, holding up the yellow paper. "President Taft signed the statehood bill this morning. New Mexico is officially the 47th state." Sarah let out a whoop of excitement and launched herself from the fence into her father's arms. Elara felt tears of joy spring to her eyes as she realized that their daughter would grow up not as a territorial citizen with uncertain rights, but as a full American with all the protections and opportunities that status provided. "Does this mean you'll be running for the state legislature?" Sarah asked, her voice muffled against Tom's shoulder. "That depends on whether the voters want me," Tom replied, though there was little doubt about his popularity throughout the region. His work on territorial commissions had earned him respect across party lines, and his advocacy for civil rights and fair labor practices had made him a hero to many of the state's minority populations. "Of course they want you, Papa. You're the most honest politician in New Mexico." "A low bar to clear, I'm afraid," Tom said with a chuckle, "but I appreciate the confidence." That evening, as they sat around the dinner table celebrating the historic day, the conversation turned to the future, both for New Mexico and for their family. Sarah, now old enough to understand the complexities of politics and social change, asked questions that showed she'd been thinking seriously about her own role in the world. "Mama," she said, cutting her steak with precise movements, "Mrs. Patterson in town said that women will never get the vote because we're too emotional to make rational political decisions. What do you think about that?" Elara exchanged a look with Tom, both of them recognizing the importance of the moment. Their daughter was beginning to grapple with the same questions about women's roles and rights that had shaped so much of their own relationship. "I think," Elara said carefully, "that Mrs. Patterson has confused being emotional with being passionate about justice. Some of the most rational political decisions I've seen have been made by women who care deeply about protecting their families and communities. But women can't vote in New Mexico, can they?" "Not yet," Tom interjected. "But that's changing. Several states have already granted women full suffrage, and I believe it's only a matter of time before it becomes federal law to be. And when it does," Elara added, "I hope you'll be ready to exercise that right thoughtfully and courageously." Sarah nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Will you teach me about politics, Papa? About how government really works, and how to tell when politicians are being honest?" "I'd be honored to," Tom replied, "though I suspect you're already better at spotting dishonesty than most adults." Later that night, after Sarah had gone to bed with a stack of books about American government, Tom and Elara sat on their porch, enjoying the cool evening air. The familiar sounds of the ranch settling for the night provided a peaceful backdrop to their conversation. "She's going to be formidable," Tom observed, referring to their daughter's sharp questions and obvious intelligence. "She already is," Elara replied. "Sometimes I watch her and wonder what my life would have been like if I'd had her confidence at that age. You might have ended up in a very different place. Or I might have ended up in exactly the same place, just by a different route." Elara leaned back in her chair, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "I've been thinking about that lately, about whether everything that happened to me was necessary to make me who I am today." "Do you think it was?" "I think," Elara said slowly, "that suffering isn't necessary for growth, but it can be transformative if you choose to learn from it rather than be broken by it. Sarah is growing up with security and love and opportunities I never had, but that doesn't mean she'll be weak. It means she'll be strong in a different way." Tom reached over and took her hand, a gesture that still carried the same comfort and connection it had on their wedding night 15 years before. "She has the best of both of us, your determination and my, what would you call it? Your steadiness. Your ability to see the best in people and situations, even when they don't deserve it. And your courage to act on principle, even when it's difficult or unpopular." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts, about the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. The scared girl who'd been sold to pay gambling debts and the grieving widower who'd rescued her had become partners in every sense of the word, in business, in politics, in parenting, and in the ongoing work of building a life worth living. "Tom," Elara said eventually, "when you run for the legislature, and we both know you will, I want to be more than just the supportive wife standing beside you at campaign events." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I want to be your political partner." as well as your personal one. New Mexico is going to need advocates for women's rights, for fair labor practices, for policies that protect families like the one we've built. I have opinions about those things, and I have experience that could be valuable." Tom smiled, though she couldn't see it clearly in the darkness. "Elara Whitehawk, are you telling me you want to go into politics?" "I'm telling you I want to use every tool available to help build the kind of state where our daughter can grow up with the same opportunities as any man, where families like ours can thrive regardless of their background or circumstances. Then we'll do it together," Tom said without hesitation, "just like we've done everything else." As the night deepened around them, Elara felt a familiar sense of anticipation about the future. New Mexico's statehood represented more than just a change in political status. It was an opportunity to help shape the kind of society they wanted to live in, to influence policies that would affect generations to come. Their personal story of transformation and redemption was becoming part of a larger narrative about the American West's evolution from frontier territory to modern society. The choices they'd made, to treat each other as equals, to build their success on principles of fairness and respect, to raise their daughter with both love and high expectations, were becoming part of the foundation upon which New Mexico would build its future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else, together, with courage, and with an unshakable belief in the possibility of building something better from the raw materials of hope and hard work. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.